Life-changing.
Leading.
Assistive. Evolving.
Future.
Complicated.
Vast. Wow. Amazement.
Powerful. Watson's definitely powerful.
For me, the biggest one is meaningful. It truly is profoundly meaningful work. One of the first times I really got to see where this was going was we had some of our representatives from Memorial Sloan Kettering get up, and they really talked about just how promising they thought this would be.
One of the amazing realizations is how much like a learned colleague it can be. IBM Watson can just go into a medical record system, pull out all the relevant data, and do it much more quickly. The response from patients to me has been absolutely overwhelming.
People are getting to understand the implications that this will have for every profession and every industry.
We're using Watson to make travel decisions. We're using Watson to make cooking decisions.
With the collaboration between IBM and SoftBank, we are working to bring Watson to new markets and to teach Watson Japanese.
The biggest surprise that we found is the receptiveness to this new technology. In the past, it's taken years for people to get comfortable with this.
My own view is that every single professional on the planet can be as good as the best professional in their field with the help of a cognitive assistant.
It's really about scaling the greatest minds to every mind. I think that's the promise of Watson.
It is a technology that can go anywhere and do almost anything at this point.
It's a future in which that intelligence embodies itself in the physical spaces in which we work and live. And that transition is really extraordinary.
Please welcome back to the stage Michael Falkowski, Director of Analytics at IBM Federal.
Thank you, everybody. I hope you guys enjoyed the lunch that was provided to you, and I hope you're enjoying the content that's been presented up to this point. So good afternoon, and I think you'll like our next speaker and what we have lined up for the rest of the day for you. So I want to make sure I get this right, so pardon me for reading a little bit. Our next speaker today is Mr. Rob High, and Rob is the Vice President and Chief Technology Officer for IBM Watson. He leads the team responsible for bringing cognitive computing to the world, supporting the development of deep natural language processing, and other cognitive computing capabilities in the areas of speech, language, vision, and reasoning. Under his leadership, Watson is ushering in a new era of computing in which systems are able to interact in natural language, analyze large volumes of unstructured data, respond to complex questions with evidence-based answers, and discover new actionable patterns and insights. Rob is recognized as a global technological leader and was named an IBM Fellow in 2008 for his pioneering work in the field of services-oriented architecture and his leadership on WebSphere. So without further ado, I'd like you to please join me in welcoming Rob to the stage. Thank you.
Very good. Well, thank you for being here today. I want to start with something that I think is absolutely essential for us to understand about this idea of cognitive computing. By the way, before I get into it, anybody hear about the work that we did with Jeopardy? Anybody? Did you see that? Okay. A couple of you, anyway. All right. Good. Thank you. It's been a little while since we did that. It's been actually a little over 6 years now since we did that piece of work. What was profound about that piece of work is not that it was sort of on stage and publicly demonstrating its ability to perform that game, but specifically that it was able to reason about the language of the questions being asked and use that to go find answers in a very large body of information, actually literally 200 million pages of literature that were ingested into Watson for the purposes of playing that game, and be able to find answers to questions that people were asking. And so for us, that was a pretty fundamental moment in time. It was the first time in the history of our industry that we had been able to build a machine that could reason with that level of depth and clarity and do so at the scales that we were talking about. But it's left people with sort of a lot of open questions about what this thing is, what this technology is about, and where to apply it. And so I want you to consider this very, very basic idea, and that is that cognitive computing is about, it's about commercials. Sorry, let's go through that. Cognitive computing is about amplifying human cognition. It's about amplifying human cognition. It's about amplifying us. It's about taking the things that we're really good at and helping us extend that capability beyond what we can normally reach. You know, just like every other tool that we have ever encountered, every other tool that humankind has created, you know, since the advent of the agricultural age back 10,000 years ago or so, every tool that we have gotten utility from, that has been durable and that we still make use of, has one basic idea to it, one basic capability, and that is that these tools extend us. They amplify our strengths. Shovels, you know, hammers, hydraulics, all these kinds of tools that we've created have given us the strength to do things that we couldn't do by ourselves. And yes, humans are very good at a number of cognitive tasks. We can read, we can assimilate, we can imagine, we can feel, we can see perspectives and solve problems and adapt to problems with remarkable ease and really incredible beauty if you really consider the amazing sophistication of our own minds. But yet, there's a lot that we can't do. There's a lot that are kind of constraining for us. While we can read, there's only so much that we can read. While we can assimilate, there's only so much that we can assimilate. And then, of course, our ability to remember and recall at the moment where we need to make a decision, all of these things are somewhat constrained, confined, they're limited for us as human beings. And that is where a cognitive system can help participate and contribute and extend our own cognitive reach. That is why we consider what we're doing here to be not only valuable, but fundamentally important. You know, there's an issue, and you probably have heard this already spoken about. You know, the amount of data that's being produced in our world today is absolutely astronomical. We estimated that in 2016, we were generating about 2.5 exabytes of data every single day. 2.5 billion characters of data being produced every single day. That's a large number. I presume there's some data scientists in the room. Right? Some mathematicians, at least some of you that might be familiar with 2.5 billion. I don't know if you've seen that before, but it's a very large number. The way that I like to think about that, to kind of put that in perspective, that's equivalent to about 625 billion Harry Potter books being written every single day. Now, of course, not all the data that's being produced is in a literary form. It's not all about articles and papers and blogs and emails and tweets and, well, a lot of it's tweets. It's not all about that. You know, some of it is about recorded information, right? Audio recordings, video recordings, pictures, images. A lot of it is Internet of Things data, right? IoT data. The data that's being collected from sensors and devices and about our environment or about machines and other things, that too is also producing a great deal of that amount of information that's being collected every day. And of course, you know, some percentage of that, about 20% of that data is traditional, quantitative, structured information, the kinds of things that traditional computing has been able to operate on. That is also part of that 2.5 exabytes of data. But the point is that that data is growing at an enormous rate. We estimate by 2020 that 2.5 exabytes will have grown to about 44 zettabytes of data being produced every single day. And as human beings, guess what? We're not able to read it all. We're not able to assimilate it all. We're not able to understand it all. We're not able to use it all. And that's where analytics, and more specifically where cognitive computing starts to step in, because with what we have been able to do so far in the world of cognitive computing, we can now use machines to go in and read that information and begin to make sense of it, at least be able to identify what's important about that information and draw our attention to that information at the right time at the moment that we're making decisions. That's what we're getting out of these cognitive systems. That's where we have been able to take Watson since we played the game of Jeopardy. That's essentially what we were demonstrating in the game of Jeopardy, but now we're applying to real-world situations. So let me just step back for a moment and describe what I define to be a cognitive system. First of all, in order for it to assist us in the ways that I'm just describing, a cognitive system has to be able to understand us. It has to be able to understand our language. It has to be able to understand the things that we experience and get exposed to. It has to be able to understand our forms of expression. It has to be able to understand the context in which we operate. It has to be able to understand us in our world, to be able to even participate. It has to be able to understand the problems that we're trying to address in the way that we tend to want to understand them. It has to be about those problems, or at least reason about how the information that it finds might be applicable to the problems that we're trying to address. He needs to be able to look at that information and identify what of that is relevant to a given problem. It needs to be able to extrapolate from that information. It needs to be able to produce information results that are relevant to the problems that we're trying to solve. And these systems have to learn. We can't program them. We can't sit down and collect up enough of the rules that define our everyday experiences and the way that we, perceive information and make use of that information. If we were to attempt to sit down and write out all the rules, even the rules of language, think about language for a moment, and all the subtlety and the innuendo and, metaphorical, inferences that we create and use in our language. If I were to sit down and write down all the rules of language and all the conditions in which we say one thing but mean something else, or have interpretations of what's being said that could be applied into different circumstances to mean different things, or to fill in the gaps, right? Our language tends to be very contextual. My wife says to me this morning, she's going to stop by the store on the way home tonight. That's a fairly ambiguous statement. It doesn't say what time or what store or where or what she's going to be getting. But if she and I have also had a conversation about needing groceries for dinner tonight, and I know what time she gets off work, and I know what time where she typically shops, I can fill in those details. She doesn't have to be complete in what she says. I can understand what she means by taking my contextual history and applying it to fill in those gaps. And we all do this. But I could not possibly sit down and write all the rules that represent all the conditions involved in making that decision, being able to judge and understand what she means. So these systems have to learn. We employ machine learning techniques, and now more recently, specifically deep learning techniques, to teach these systems how to interpret and judge and recognize what we mean and how to reason. And finally, they have to interact with us in human terms, because the idea that this thing is going to amplify my cognition is really more about it being able to influence my own creative processes, about it being able to influence me at that moment where I need to make a decision by presenting to me choices, options, different perspectives, different points of view, and maybe to some extent even inspiring me to new ideas. And to be able to do that, of course, it has to have some sort of psychological impact on me. It has to be able to influence me. It has to influence the way I'm thinking. And you can't do that with the traditional forms of interaction that we've had for the last 70 years, since Jonathan van Neumann began work on the modern blueprint for computing. Right? Ever since he did that work back in 1947 at the Center of Advanced Studies back in New Jersey, we have essentially been adapting ourselves as human beings to the constraints of the computer when we interface and interact with them. Right? In the early days, it was punch cards, and it was later as green screens. But even now, if you think about the apps on your mobile phone and on your laptops and at work, right? The interface that we typically are dealing with today still requires that we enter into entry fields, right? And press radio buttons and sliders and lots of very advanced forms of graphical interaction. But nonetheless, none of those are really all that natural for us. We're having to adjust and we're having to adapt ourselves to the constraints of how the computer wants to interface with us. And so to be able to really have an influence on us, the cognitive system has to be able to interact with us in ways that are natural for us, around our language, around our forms of communication, using our vocal approaches to communicating, using our body language, being aware and being able to recognize, our body language, our facial expressions, our eye contact, our arm and hand movements, our body movements, all those things are relevant to how we communicate with each other. They help inform you and me as we listen to each other. It's not just my words, not just simply listening to my words. You're being influenced by the way that I vocalize those words, the inflection I apply to that, the intonation, the cadence, the timbre. All those things are helping you understand better what I mean by drawing attention to the things that are the words that are more important than others in the point that I'm trying to make. Likewise, you're influenced by my body language. And so to the extent that these systems are going to have that kind of impact on us, the ability to actually influence and inspire us, they too also have to be able to interact with us in ways that we are designed to handle. That is, the forms of communication that we are used to. So this is what I describe as a cognitive system. That doesn't mean that we have all these things nailed down. It doesn't mean that we have solved all of these issues and we are perfect at being able to perform each of these 4 different characteristics of a cognitive system, but we certainly have established a beachhead. Right? We've begun this journey. And I will suggest to you that we are on a long journey, that these systems will continue to evolve and get richer and deeper and more meaningful and have a stronger and deeper impact on our own thinking, not to replace our mind, but to augment our mind. Right? To not do our thinking for us, but perhaps to do our research for us so we can do our thinking better. And for all of you who may have seen some of the popular press that wants to talk about how cognitive systems and AI are going to replace human beings in the workforce, that are going to eliminate jobs, I just want to suggest to you that may be the wrong way of thinking about this. The right way of thinking about this is that for everything that we do well, there may be an opportunity for us to do it better with these cognitive systems amplifying. And yes, that may have some job displacement. There may be some tasks that we do today that we will no longer have to do in the future, just as we did, say, 15, 20, 30 years ago before calculators became a common thing. In those days, we had to sit down with a piece of pencil and paper and write out or do our own math on our head, on paper or on our head. And the task of doing that basic math activity can now largely be done by a calculator. They didn't take away our job. What it did is it made it possible for us to do other things in our job that were more meaningful and more valuable. And that's exactly how we think about these cognitive systems as well. So in the last 6 years or so since we did Jeopardy, we've done a lot in terms of applying these cognitive technologies to a number of basic and pretty important business problems and social problems. You may have seen some of the work that we've done with Memorial Sloan Kettering around helping cancer doctors identify better treatments for their patients, and that is in production, and we're already seeing evidence of how this is impacting how doctors make better decisions, and that in turn translates into improvements in people's lives. But we got to a certain point right around 2013, 2014 where we realized that this thing that we call cognitive computing or AI was going to be bigger than us, bigger than IBM. It was going to be fundamental to our industry, our information computing industry. It was going to be fundamental to every industry out there. It was going to be fundamental basically to every walk of life. everything that we do in life was going to be impacted by this thing that we call cognitive computing. We estimate that by the end of this year, we will have about 1 billion people on this planet who in one way or another are making use of cognitive computing. IDC estimates that by 2018, next year, about half the planet will be making use of some form of cognitive computing in everyday activities. So this is coming on very, very fast, and we realized in the process that we couldn't keep up with all the demand, and the only way to really bring this out in any sort of sizable and meaningful way was to turn this into a platform, to open up the APIs, to kind of take all the things that we learned and the componentry that we had created for developing solutions and to decompose that, to refactor those capabilities into a set of services. And those services end up being organized around 3 main categories. And if you're familiar with the work that Daniel Kahneman has done, if you ever read his book on the fast and slow mind, you'll be familiar with what I'm about to talk about, which is that Kahneman refers to system 1 thinking, which we can largely equate to being our subconscious processes, or subconscious thought processes, which, by the way, we often trivialize as though they may not be all that, complicated. But in reality, our system 1, our subconscious processes, are actually quite sophisticated. They just happen to be very fast at doing what they do. They're highly specialized. They don't tend to be highly precise, but they are reasonably accurate. And we rely on them for virtually everything that we do. We rely on them for our survival. And so we have a set of services in the cognitive system that have a similar concept, a similar notion of being largely about recognition and interpretation and reaction. And that's what I refer to as foundational cognitive skills. And then Kahneman also talks about system 2, which is roughly equivalent to our conscious thought processes. It's the kind of stuff for which we apply some cognitive energy. We actually can calculate the number of calories that are consumed when we reason about problems consciously using higher reasoning skills, and that's what I refer to in our platform as well. These are services who are computationally expensive but perform deep, detailed tasks, reasoning about things like conversations and what we call discovery. And I'll describe these in a little bit more detail in a minute. And then finally, we have knowledge organization skills, which you can roughly equate to the kinds of things that we do at night when we sleep, when we dream. We take our experiences of the day and we can move them from short-term memories into long-term memories. We index that information, or we reorganize it so that we can access that information more efficiently next day. That's also a capability that we have that we refer to as knowledge organization skills, and all of those are in our platform at this point. It's not that that's the only thing that we do. That's just the primary thing. And when you hear us talk about Watson, at least for me, we most often mean the services that are represented in that purple band there, that middle of the platform, the set of services that fall into those 3 categories, all of which are made available as APIs in the cloud. Anybody can get to those. Anybody can go to those today even. Go to ibm.com/bluemix. And you'll be able to access the APIs. And for every one of those APIs, we have documentation, we have demonstrations, we have sample code, and things that make it very easy for people to build applications by assembling use of those services into their application. Now, we also have a set of applications that we create around vertical industries. We have the Watson Healthcare team who are out creating applications for use in the healthcare industry. We have work going on now in the area of financial services and education and IoT. And a number of other areas, but we're not the only ones creating those applications. IBM's not the sole provider of solution capability. Because we've opened these APIs up for anybody to use, then we've got global services organizations, GSIs, we have ISVs, and we have enterprise organizations that are on their own are making use of these services to build their own solutions, combining these capabilities with perhaps things that they've done themselves, like building their own analytic algorithms and integrating them into the same application alongside these cognitive services. So let me just take you through some of what these services are. And again, I want to emphasize these things are all available on Bluemix, so you can go out there today and start making use of these. The first are, again, in the area of higher reasoning skills. We essentially have 2 of these. One is around enabling you to create applications that maintain a conversation with your end user. Could be your client, your consumer, could be an internal employee, could be an analyst, whoever it is that needs functionality, whose functionality is best served through a conversation. The conversational service is designed to enable you to create that kind of an application. Now, why is this interesting? It's interesting specifically because it's in conversations that, for at least people when they're talking to each other, we are able to shape ideas. Most useful conversations basically come down to the notion that you and I are sitting down at the table together. Each of us have come to the table with our own idea, our own ideas, our own view of the world. And through our conversation, we begin to shape a new idea. We may combine our ideas. We may take a principal idea that one person is introducing and refine it. We may bring in different perspectives that change that idea and make it better. That's what a conversation should be about. It should be about evolving an idea to come away from that conversation not only with a better idea, more inspired, more satisfied, right? But with something that you can say, I am now in a better position because of the conversation I just had than I was when I went into it. That's what a conversation should be about. And so that's what we're trying to enable in these conversations. You know, there's a lot of chatbots out there. You'll see examples of other people having created these sort of conversational systems. But I will tell you that most of the conversational systems, most of the chatbots that are out there today, the examples that we see, oftentimes are just a single turn chat, right? It's somebody walking up, uttering something, either vocally or by text, right? Expressing some statement, a question or an assertion or some other thing like that. And that the chatbot will attempt to classify the intention of that utterance and map that onto doing some action, right? For those of you who have, Echoes, Amazon Echo or Google Homes, these things are becoming very popular, but if you look at the kinds of things you do with it, largely it comes down to, Alexa, turn on my music. Alexa, order me this, another set of USB cards. Somebody took my USB key again. I need another set of those. They're single turn actions, right? Which are useful, those are powerful, but they're not a conversation. When somebody comes up and says, Alexa, what's my balance? Knowing their account balance is not their problem. Their problem is that they're trying to figure out how to go, whether they have enough money to go buy something, or they're trying to save up for their kids' education, or they're trying to determine whether they have enough money in their account to go pay their bills this month. Right? That's their problem. A conversational agent should attempt to go in and find out what the real problem is and figure out how to serve and help that person through that problem. And that's true in both the consumer space as well as at work, for analysts and so on and so forth. So this idea of a conversation is actually quite powerful and something that should not be dismissed, even though our tradition has been to present some of these kinds of applications through more of a sort of structured interface. Remember what I said before. The problem with those kinds of structured interfaces is that they require the end user to adapt to the constraints of the computer. Just because a computer can only express itself through those kinds of structured interfaces doesn't mean that that is necessarily the best way for that user to get the information they're looking for. So think about the applicability of conversations in almost anything that you do today. Now, of course, one of the problems that we have in the conversational space is that where people go to get access to your business, to your enterprise, is changing. It used to be, especially if you're in the commercial space, if in the commercial space, you had this sort of bricks and mortar place where people went to, right? People went to the store, they went to the bank, they went to the doctor, they went to places to go do business with your institution. And later that metaphor, that idea kind of got, transformed into web applications and web locations, right? You had a URL and you go to that website, and that website was virtually your place, your bricks and mortar, the place where people go to get access to your goods and services and to do business with you. But there's a counter phenomenon occurring, and it's been going on for a little while, which is most people, and especially consumers, spend most of their time on the internet actually in a place called a social site, a social media site, right? A messaging platform, a place like Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter, right? That's where they spend most of their time. They're there because that's how they interact and communicate with their social groups, right? Or the professional groups, the people they want to deal with, their friends and families and colleagues. That's where they go. So they spend a lot of time there. So the idea has become, rather than demanding that you get out of your social site, out of your messaging platform, and now go to my website to do business with me, how about if I instead, as a business, come to you and that social site? And so more and more businesses, we think about 60% of the industry businesses out there today, actually have made, have created portals in Twitter for you to go do business with them. So you never have to leave Twitter and get out of that paradigm to now also be able to deal with the businesses you're dealing with. Now, the problem, of course, is that that means that if you are a business, and given all the variety of different sites that people may be at, these different messaging platforms, you don't want to have to sit there and build a different conversational agent for each one of those platforms. So we have devised an architectural approach for you to create a single conversational agent that can be plugged into any number of different social media sites, messaging platforms, both consumer, social, as well as professional media sites. If you're at work, there's a good chance that now you're probably also using Slack at work, right? It's the same paradigm, the same idea. It just simply has a lot of emphasis on being useful at work instead of at home. But nonetheless, that is a very common phenomenon. Now, it turns out that's not the only place where people want to be able to deploy their conversational agents. Of course, we still have the traditional sites, you know, the web applications, the mobile applications, even IVR-based channels as well. But coming forward, think about what's happening with now Amazon's Echo, Google Home, Samsung announced that they're going to do something similar, Siri, if you're using that already. What is essentially happening now is that these devices are now entering into our homes as a voice assistant, as something that's designed and dedicated to the idea of being that point of interface between you and the system, the chatbot or the conversational agent or the application that you care about. And that is going to grow. In fact, we think that that's going to grow rapidly and go and extend beyond merely being a cylinder sitting on your desktop or your countertop to now incorporating other forms. Right? Think about this. Think about your car. Think about when you get in your car. What if your car were to sort of wake up and come alive to you when you got into it, and not only recognize who you are, recognize who you're with, recognize where you're going, recognize what's going on in the environment around you. What's the weather like? What time of day is it? What are the road conditions? What other events are occurring on the road? What if it were able to assimilate all that, and in its interface to you, as you asked it, how do I get from here to work, or how do I go from here to Houston, or how do I get from here to wherever I need to get to, or whatever I need to do, it was able to factor all that into its interaction with you as a car, right? There's no device there. It's just the car. It's the car itself is the device. The car is sort of a Uber form, no pun intended, of, you know, an Amazon Echo. It just so happens the microphone and speaker and the intelligence are kind of buried into the car at various places, but maybe it's even more than that. Maybe it's also a camera. Maybe it's other sensors that are also incorporated into that car. So we're going to see lots of examples of that, including, for example, in our offices and conference rooms. And what I'm going to show you next is a video of a piece of work that we did in my lab where we set up Watson as a voice assistant, but the device that you're interacting with is the room itself, right? It's microphones, it's speakers in the ceiling, it's large format displays, it's cameras. And this is a conference room, so it's not even just about you and the machine. It's about the normal things that you do when you go into a conference room. You're in there trying to make a decision. You've got something on the table. You're working with other colleagues. Some people have information they're bringing to the table. All of you are contributing, working together towards making the decision And what you're going to see in this video is that Watson, we call her Celia in this case, Celia is in the room, part of the room, and participating in this interaction, this meeting, this conversation, for the purposes of helping these two guys, and I have to apologize in advance, these are engineers, they're not professional actors, so forgive their acting abilities. But what they're demonstrating too is the idea of them trying to make a decision about mergers and acquisitions. And by the way, these are not companies that we're interested in buying, but we put them in there for demonstration purposes.
Hi, Jeff.
Hi, John. Hi, Celia. This is Jeff Kephart speaking.
Hello, Jeffrey O. Kephart.
So what would you like to cover today, John?
I'd like to go back and cover Project Zinnia, if we could.
Jeffrey,
Yes, Celia?
it sounds like you're interested in acquisitions.
Mm-hmm.
Would you like me to restore your most recent work session?
That would be great. Celia, restore my last work session. We were working on Decisive Analytics. There's the website for it. I have the sense that you liked this company a lot.
We have a strategic gap in this area, and Decisive Analytics fills that gap very nicely. We should look at more companies like Decisive Analytics.
Okay, so we could place Decisive Analytics at the center of the universe of companies and explore from there. Celia, find companies similar to the company named Decisive Analytics.
I found 100 companies that are similar to Decisive Analytics Corporation.
This is excellent. I see a couple of companies that I recognize, but the total set of companies is much broader than I would have been able to come up with myself.
Good.
I'd like to explore this in more detail.
Celia, tell me more about the company named Strategic Analysis, Inc., focused on business.
Okay.
Okay, so here's some information about it. What do you think, John?
I think government professional services, and they do software development. I think this is an excellent candidate.
Good.
Maybe we can limit the revenue numbers of these companies to be between 20 million and 200 million.
Sure. Celia, highlight companies with revenue between $20 million and $200 million.
Okay.
Maybe we can start to examine these in more detail and work through some decisions.
Oh, sure. Celia, shrink the graph window.
Between us and the cognitive system is going to change. And it's going to change in almost every different place that we go to. So if you measure the number of smartphones in the world today by essentially the number of people in the world, all of us on average carrying essentially one smartphone apiece on average, that says that at some point we should see about 7 billion phones in the world, and that'll be about it. Maybe a little bit more. But what we're going to see in the future is that there's going to be as many different embodied devices for that interface between us and the computing system as there are places where we go, right? Whether that is our stores, our doctor's offices, our banks, our cars, our homes, our bedrooms perhaps, our living rooms certainly, kitchens, offices, conference rooms, every place where we go, there's likely to be a cognitive presence in some form, right, that is part of the space that you go to. And we're seeing lots of examples of that surfacing. And I'm not making that prediction because I think that IBM has a vested interest in that, but because I think that's a reality that we have to expect. We have to be aware of and harness and take use of. Now, obviously, creating these conversational systems do take some effort, and if your purpose is to have the effect of engaging people in a conversation that works them through their problems, that can take some time and effort. So to facilitate that, we've created this thing called Watson Virtual Agent, which is essentially a set of predefined conversations for a number of very common activities that you'll find in virtually any kind of application you're involved with, whether that is account management kinds of things, whether it's billing. There's a number of these sorts of utility functions that are always part of every application you have to deal with that we simply have predefined and pre-created the set of dialogues and conversations, the intents and the entities that are associated with having really robust conversations for that kind of thing to kind of jumpstart any activity, any application that you want to get interested in. Now, the other thing I want to talk about here a little bit is these foundational cognitive skills Remember what I said before, system 1, these are sort of the equivalent of subconscious, the kinds of things that we do in our subconscious, which is largely about recognition, a little bit about reaction. Now it turns out because we have the longest history in language processing, that's where we have the greatest number of capabilities, and so you'll see that. But these are the kinds of things where if you supply the service a document, it will be able to identify the entities and relationships, the concepts, the author, the date, these sorts of things in that document, so that then you can make use of that for your own forms of higher reasoning or within the higher reasoning services that we have. But we also have speech services, the ability to translate text and speech into text, and we can do that with inflection and with cadence and other forms of vocalization that punctuate the things that we want to say, and we do that with vision. Right? We can take an image, it could be a still image, it could be a video image, of something that you care about, and we can identify what's in that image. We can identify how many people are in there, whether there's a crowd, what sort of actions are occurring in that image. We can identify the objects in the image and so on and so forth. And people are finding a lot of utility in that, especially around applications that are integrated into your phone, where you can sort of pull up your application on your smartphone and take a picture of something and quickly recognize what's in there. And then finally, and I don't want to underemphasize this, empathy. Empathy is a big part of our subconscious recognition process, right? We recognize each other's personality. We recognize each other's emotion and the tone that we're trying to convey. And that becomes important, especially for having a meaningful conversation. We have to recognize who the person is that we're dealing with and aspects of their personality and emotional state to be able to interact with them effectively. So I'm going to give you a real quick example here, and I am running out of time, so I'm going to keep this very short. But this is an example of a entry that somebody submitted to an online dating service. This is their profile, and they're trying to describe themselves, and for the purposes of finding, a date, I guess, some sort of mate. And so we can analyze this, and we can look at the tone of that overall document. And of course, as you like to imagine, there's a great deal of joy in this. We detect a great deal of joyfulness in this document, which is good. I think that's what you should, do if you're going to try to find somebody. You want them to think that you're a good person. But it turns out there's some other subtleties in this document that are worth kind of pointing out. Now I'll start with one. This says, what I'm doing with my life, working toward a new goal, keeping fit, helping others, and traveling whenever I get a chance. And it turns out 47% of people reading this will hear the joy in that. So it's a good, positive number. It's certainly not as high as I think I would like it to be, but at least some people are hearing some joyfulness in that. But let's take another example. This one. It says, I'm really good at listening, enjoying the moment, and many other things. Turns out 21% of people will hear sadness in that. Why is that? It's because it tapers off, right? It says, I'm really good at listening, enjoying the moment, and too many other things I'm too depressed to tell you about. It doesn't elaborate, right? And people will hear that. Take one more example here. I raised 2 great kids, and now I'm starting a new chapter of life. 23% of people will hear anger in that. Right? I raised 2 great kids, and damn it, I'm starting all over again. With a new chapter of my life. That's really a euphemistic way of saying she took all my money. So tone matters. And one way of thinking about this, of course, is almost thinking about it as a spell checker, right? Before you send that email off to your boss, make sure that they're going to hear it the way you want them to hear it, right? You may want to reword it because they may not be listening to it the way that you mean for them to be, the way you intended when you sent it out. But we use this in dialogue, and I'm going to show you another example here where we've embedded this into a conversation. And what I'm going to show you is 2 passes through the same conversation, but in which, and you'll see Pepper being the point of interface here, but in any case, one case, Pepper is hearing a very positive response in the conversation, and the conversation will take one turn, and then we'll play it again. This time you'll see a negative response being heard, and the conversation will take a different turn. And again, forgive me, my engineers are not great actors, but at least you'll get the idea.
Did you have lunch yet?
Yes, I did.
Can you tell me about what you ate today?
I had a bacon sandwich.
Bacon. How do you feel about what you ate?
Wonderful. I am so satisfied.
Hey now, that was a big splurge. Make sure to reduce or burn more calories to offset times you spoil yourself.
Hello.
Did you have lunch yet?
Yes, I did.
Can you tell me about what you ate today?
I had a bacon sandwich.
Bacon. How do you feel about what you ate?
I feel kind of guilty for overindulging myself.
Yes, it's not the best choice, but it's okay to have something unhealthy from time to time. Everything in moderation. No, no, no! No, no, no!
So we're going to wrap up there, but take away from that a couple of things. One is that conversations are a big part of how we create a natural relationship, a natural form of communication between the cognitive system and human beings. And in doing so, we have to be sensitive to the human condition. We have to be sensitive to how humans react, what they're thinking, how they're feeling, their personality, the environments that they're in. But in doing so, we end up with a system that is able to have a much deeper and more influential relationship with that person than we would without. And that's really what I think is going to be the most obvious and clear aspect of what we see in these cognitive systems going forward, is not just their ability to analyze great numbers of data and to understand the language and understand the literature and to be able to figure out the right information to bring to the table at the right time, but that they have a relationship with us as human beings that amplifies our cognition. Thank you.